Welcome to Manager Tools. This is Sarah.
And this is Mark.
Today's cast, Why Negative Feedback is So Hard. Part 1 of 2.
The questions this cast answers are, why is negative feedback so darn hard to deliver? What can I do to make negative feedback easier? Why do my directs always argue or defend themselves when I give them negative feedback? If you want the answers to these questions and more, stick around.
Who doesn't want to visit Miami in March? And we've got the perfect reason. Manager Tools will be there March 11th and 12th. Visit us by registering online today at manager-tools.com/register. So Mark, even though managers complain about not having time to do Manager Tools one-on-ones, as soon as they start doing them, they love them and continue to sing their praises. Now, unfortunately, that same thing doesn't happen when it comes to feedback. Even though they know it's the second most important thing they can do, managers know they ought to spend 5 hours a week in one-on-ones and then maybe only spend a total of 15 minutes on feedback.
But they still don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Now, folks, there are plenty of good reasons for this. Well, they're not great reasons, but clearly managers think they're good enough reasons to not deliver on what is a core part of our jobs. So we're here to talk about why and what we can do about it.
Yeah. So here's our outline. We're going to talk about all the reasons, and then with each of the reasons, we'll talk about how to address it. Because this is Manager Tools, and we give you actionable guidance. The first one, the big one, of course, is lack of trust. Second one, their own experience, managers' previous failures, lack of positive feedback, the previous boss effect, which I think we have an entire cast about, lack of briefing in advance, lack of practice as well.
Okay, so now let's start with talking about lack of trust. This is a biggie, folks. The single biggest reason bosses don't give enough feedback is because their directs don't trust them enough yet. And this lack of trust, it leads to all kinds of ineffective behaviors. That is resistance from the directs, pushback, if you will, defensiveness, which we'll cover later. There's also the previous boss effect. Again, something we'll cover later. Lack of a briefing, also covering later. And it certainly leads to defensiveness and pushback, again, covering later.
Right. We'll cover defensiveness and pushback through the entire thing because that's probably the behavior that causes all of these reasons to boil up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, like you said, lack of trust is number one. It's at the root of virtually all the problems that managers have about not wanting to give feedback. They don't really know it. Managers just say, well, I get a lot of pushback. But what they don't realize is the cause of that pushback is lack of trust. Mm-hmm. Some of the time, it's because managers know they're not trusted enough, so they just don't want to deliver feedback. They're predicting. They don't even have to get the feedback or get the defensiveness of the pushback. They just know they're going to get it, and so they don't want to deliver feedback. Now, look, we managers ought to know that the role-power differential between us and our directs, and if you combine that with a lack of investment in trust building, it's going to lead to much more difficult interactions. In fact, the vast majority, the reason why one-on-ones are so loved, the vast majority of the inefficiencies in managers, the lack of ability to get their job done, the lack of ability to push new ideas, the lack of ability to start new programs and so on, is because their directs don't trust them enough. And I've talked to, well, how many tens, hundreds of thousands by now, managers I've talked to over the last 30 years. And they don't necessarily see, again, the lack of trust. What they see is the pushback and the defensiveness. Yep. And we'll talk more about how the pushback causes flavor of the month problems, which is endemic across managers all over the world. And look, managers are busy with their own work. Mm-hmm. Managing is harder. Companies don't teach us.
Yeah.
Right? Other than Manager Tools, we don't know anybody who really teaches the basics of management. And so what happens is managers start withdrawing from
Yeah.
their relationship with their directs. And if you then are told by your boss, for instance, well, you need to talk to him about that, inevitably it's about something negative. So managers just learn to avoid those difficult interactions. And to be fair, they know they don't know. And unfortunately, a lot of managers mistakenly believe when they look around the room, they see a bunch of other managers that have relatively calm and placid faces, and they think those people must know what they're doing. But trust us, they don't know what they're doing. And it's almost logical for the manager to say, I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know how to do it. And so I'm not going to do it. Even if, yes, intellectually they understand.
Yeah.
This is clearly one of my top 2 jobs after building trust is giving performance communications. In fact, most managers don't even realize about the trust thing, and that's fine. But they still know I got to give performance communications, even if it's only in an annual review, which of course is not really feedback. And one of the things we want to say here, and for the record, those of you who are licensees and are going to read this, it's not going to be in the show notes, is that managers should feel okay that they don't know.
Yeah.
We want you to forgive yourself about all these things. We're not telling you you're wrong. We understand where you are. And it's okay to feel like you don't know what you're doing because the vast majority of managers don't. And that's why Manager Tools exist, to tell you some basic things you can do. And over the years, we've been able to include some other things that help you understand the why of the underlying principles that drive these things. And we need to teach you the why, even though sometimes that's not as actionable, because it gives you an understanding of the principle you're taking behavior on. And when you understand that, and the situation is slightly different from standard, because you understand the why, you know how to adjust your how.
Yeah.
And too often, if you just tell somebody, just do this thing, they will do it, but they will, when it comes to edge cases, not be as good as it. And that's why we get into the why. Look, managers know. I can't imagine any manager in the world doesn't know that they're obligated to give feedback. But again, as human beings, we shy away from things that are going to be difficult.
Yep.
And because we shy away from it, even though we know we want potential change of behavior, we know it will work if we knew what to do, but we don't know what
we
to
don't
do,
know.
and we're afraid of it. And in the margins, when we have a choice of giving feedback or not giving feedback, negative feedback, we choose not to do it. Part of that is a misunderstanding of the fundamental purpose of feedback. The vast majority of managers think that negative feedback is about pointing out the error. I had somebody in a recent virtual EMC tell me, well, I think my goal in giving feedback is to tell them what to do next time. And I said, no, that's not your goal. The goal in giving feedback is it's the same, whether it's positive or negative, is to encourage effective future behavior. Now, any manager who thinks that I can be direct to the point of roughness or direct to the point of a little bit of anger, a little bit of frustration, or why did you do that? I can't believe you did that. That was not very smart. Or in a bad day, that was dumb. If they think that's encouraging, then they're crazy.
Yeah.
No one thinks that's encouraging. But all that tells me, based on years looking at data and watching managers do their job, is that managers don't understand that the purpose of feedback is always to encourage effective future behavior.
Yeah.
Your job actually is to encourage people, to give them courage to do their jobs and skills to do their jobs well. But even if you know that, managers know that if every negative feedback conversation is going to be a fight, they'd just rather not have it. And because they know it won't lead to effective behaviors, but they secretly hope that their directs will figure it out. And like they did, because they didn't. I mean, we'll talk about how managers have their own experience receiving feedback. They figure, well, I figured it out. They should be able to figure it out. It's kind of like, well, it was hard for me, so it should be hard for you. Right? And that's not the efficient way to run an organization.
No, it's not. It's not. And I would say there's also a lot of managers have done this before. I mean, they might have come when they were a very new manager and they tried to have their first negative feedback conversation and the person reacted negatively. So they learned a lesson. Those conversations are ones that oughtn't be had lightly. And it's the wrong lesson to have learned. But this is all, it's like a tangled web of information in my mind, right? There are so many different things that are playing into an individual's behavior on any given day. And a lot of that has to do with their past experiences around certain activities. For example, the receipt of feedback. So the manager learns the wrong lesson. Don't give it, because giving it will result in something negative.
Yeah. And managers want to be liked, even by
they
their
do.
directs. They want to have a good relationship with them, and they feel that is a pinch point.
Yeah.
And if it pinches enough, they're just going to say, well, I don't want to keep doing that.
That's the thing.
It's not working. It's not working for me.
Exactly. It's not working. It's not working. Exactly.
So what this means is we have to solve for the lack of trust.
Yeah. That's exactly it.
If you build trust with your directs, you'll be amazed, folks. If you're not doing one-on-ones now, you'll be amazed at the difference. That's why so many managers love them, because it just lowers all the friction, uncertainty, and doubt. Not all, but the vast majority of friction, uncertainty, and doubt in a managerial role. And if you solve for trust, negative feedback comes much more easily. And so the answer is one-on-ones. And then, as we'll also talk about, positive feedback as well.
Yeah, that's exactly it, folks. Managers who know that feedback is a necessary part of their job might attempt to jump right into it when they first take over a team.
They know that's part of the job. And
exactly.
So they have role power now.
Right.
So why wouldn't they do it? Yeah.
Exactly. And unfortunately, that doesn't work. We know, and to Mark's point, we have data about it because we tried it years ago. We tested managers who give feedback without first building trust through the use of one-on-ones, and it was a disaster.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, I tell people this all the time. Guys, we didn't just think this stuff up and recommend it. I literally learned all this stuff in my management consulting firm, Horseman Company, the previous version of Manager Tools before there were podcasts. And we tried. We thought, we knew that giving performance communications was a part of a manager's job, the second most valuable thing they could do based on all the data we had from us and other companies. And so we said, well, we need to teach them how to give feedback. And so we started practicing.
Hot out of the
gate.
Said,
and it was horrible. Now, we had tested it in small groups and it tended to go okay, but we didn't realize the connection between trust and giving feedback. We didn't realize that trust narrows the barrier that role power creates between a manager and her direct. We literally didn't know. And so when we got the data back saying, that feedback model doesn't work, we're like, So we started digging in, and directs told us over and over again, we don't care how they give it. I just don't like it. I just don't like the way he's talking to me. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's reasonable. Now, to be fair, at that time, we not only didn't teach, we were learning about one-on-ones, we were teaching them, but we didn't connect one-on-ones with feedback. But we also hadn't connected the positive feedback too, about how if you give lots more positive feedback, whether you use the Manager Tools feedback model or not, your directs will be much more open to negative feedback, because the vast majority of things that happen in your organization are good. And if you don't recognize those, if all your boss ever does is talk to you about your mistakes, that burns trust. And it just makes things harder and harder and harder.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So in terms of the spectacular fail, I'm going to say, of the attempted feedback delivery sans a trusting relationship, we learned essentially from interviewing these directs that they couldn't keep up with the changes and their boss was overwhelmed with the speed of change, even though they were the ones who started it. That's the thing.
Yeah. Imagine your boss, for those of you who know the Trinity, one-on-ones, feedback, coaching, delegation, imagine your boss going to a training and coming back and doing all of them at once. It would be, we do know what happened. We tried it and it was just disaster. And it didn't occur to us until later. And you just mentioned it. When you're learning a new thing, your directs are learning it along with you.
Yeah.
So you have two learners, neither which truly understands it. They're just implementing a number of words in a certain order. And the directs go back to their old experience and say, he's trying to give me negative feedback. I don't like it. It's even worse that when we first started it, we told people, do one-on-ones and do feedback at the same time. Yeah. And we didn't say first positive and then negative. Why? Because we literally didn't know. By the way, at Horseman Company, if I delivered something like that, I think we ought to do this to the client. And the client says, okay, Mark, we'll do it. My guys go out and train it. And it turns out to be a disaster. We don't get results in retention improvement. We didn't get paid.
Yeah.
So there was a very economic reason why we were scrambling to figure out what worked and what didn't work, because we wanted to get paid for the work that we're doing. To be fair, we shouldn't get paid if a consulting firm, a coaching firm, a training firm says we'll improve that and then it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right? You shouldn't get paid. But believe me, there were sleepless nights for us at Horseman & Company. Like, why is this not working?
Yeah.
Now, look, you could say, look, bosses should go fast. These tools seem useful. They seem intellectually reasonable. They're logical. They're acceptable, right? And we would agree. But if speed doesn't deliver effectiveness, then speed is not the answer. In fact, Andy Holt spoke yesterday on our executive speaker series call, which is available to Executive Tools licensees. And one of the things she said is, when you're talking to IT, Andy is a very impressive IT exec and leader at one of our client companies. She said, actually, what you don't want speed. What you want is predictability, right? So you can know when things are going to happen, because then you can plan around it. But man, if you try to do a lot of manager behavior changes all at once, and your directs are learning along with you, you not only don't get the results you want, you get unpredictability. You get lots of bad interactions. And man, we had some managers, I would guess out of the hundreds of thousands we trained, several thousand said, I'm never listening to any of your guidance ever again. Because
you led me astray, friend.
Right. You did. And in some cases, we were able to sit down with them and say, hey, look, we want another bite at that apple. We were wrong. We want you to try it differently. And luckily, obviously, it wasn't luck, but luckily, obviously, it worked. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yes, when we slow things down, what we find is that results and retention increase dramatically. Because something I oftentimes say when we're training folks at the Effective Manager Conference is, people aren't great at change. The worst kind of change is when your manager is changing.
Yes.
So people
and then
need
they're
time.
expecting you to change. Yeah,
exactly.
They do.
Yeah, the people need time to receive that kind of change from, to your point earlier, Mark, somebody who has a degree of role power over them. They're not ready to move as quickly, even though the tools are perfectly valid. Rushing through it comes with very little, if not negative, value. So don't do it.
Yeah, I often tell when I actually did the first 2 sessions of a virtual Effective Manager Conference this week, and the next 2 sessions are next week. And one of the things I use as an example, I say, have you ever been sitting at your desk back when everybody was in the office and you're getting ready to write an email to one of your directs, and you see them sitting there and you say, they're at their cube, and you say, well, I'll just walk over and talk to them. It'll save me the time of writing an email and them responding and adding to their email inbox. And so you walk over to your direct and you say, hey, you got a minute? And I ask the group, what do they almost always say? And everybody goes, yes, sure. Okay, boss. And then I say, it's not because you're awesome. They say that because you're the boss and because you have role power. I tell bosses, you have a sign in there for it that says, watch out, I'm your boss. I could fire you. Now, I even also go further. What if I want to stick the knife in a little bit deeper? And I say, your directs don't think of you as a nice person. You are a nice person.
Yeah.
Very clearly.
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
I mean, we meet so many managers all over the world, and they're wonderful people trying so hard to do better. And I like to joke that we've been downloaded at Manager Tools over 250 million times. That's a lot for something as mundane and not exciting, not sexy, not cool. I mean, we're not Taylor Swift, and yet we have 250 million downloads on a podcast about management, which tells you how much managers want to get better. But the reason they don't think you're a nice person, and you are a nice person, don't get us wrong, folks, is because they think of you as their boss.
Yeah.
And without trust building, again, to narrow that gap, you can never eliminate the gap. You can't eliminate the role power. Your directs know that you have some power over them. And that power generally is seen as a negative to the health of the psychological relationship. But trust narrows the gap enormously.
Yeah.
And if you want to give feedback, especially negative feedback, where most of the pushback and defensiveness is, it doesn't work without the creation of trust first between the manager and direct. It may not be what we want tactically. It'd be better just to be able to give feedback, skip the one-on-ones. You mentioned, I think, that a bit ago, that a manager with 10 directs spends 5 hours in one-on-ones.
Yeah.
if he or she gave feedback, 3 or 4 pieces of feedback during that one-on-one, it wouldn't take them any time at all.
Yeah.
But if they did it outside of the one-on-one, maybe they'd spend 15 minutes a week giving feedback.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, folks, if you don't know our feedback model, I just want to say this. You can give feedback in 10 seconds.
Yep.
And it's as simple as, hey, can I give you some feedback? When you do that, it's a good thing. Thank you. Or, hey, can you give you some feedback? When you do that, that's not helpful. Can you work on that for me? That's all it takes. It's 10, 15 seconds. By the way, you'll start out and it'll take you 30 seconds or 40 seconds or even a minute. But over time, getting reps, which we'll talk more about later, you can reduce that down to 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And as I like to ask groups, if your boss was about to give you feedback and she's trying to decide between giving you 2 minutes of feedback about a particular one topic or 15 seconds, which would you choose? And everybody's like, oh, I want 15
No one
seconds.
wants 2 minutes.
Yeah.
No one.
Yeah. So it doesn't take long to do it. But unfortunately, because of lack of trust, you have to invest in the trust first. Again, it may not be what you want tactically. You want to get right to that feedback because you're responsible for performance. Your boss is holding you accountable. You want to hold your people accountable.
Yep.
But in the long run, building trust is the right thing to do strategically.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly it.
And that means one-on-ones.
That means one-on-ones. Exactly.
Yeah.
We often get asked if our guidance is right for companies whose main focus is production line oriented in a manufacturing environment. Lo and behold, our guidance and models of knowing your people with one-on-ones, performance communication with feedback, and organizational effectiveness with our delegation model is applicable to all organizations that have a managerial structure. Contact Maggie at customerservice@manager-tools.com to learn more about how we can serve you. Now we're going into their own experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Bosses who deliver feedback to their directs have their own experience having received feedback.
Exactly.
All the bosses were somebody's direct at some point in time.
Yeah.
They've got that experience. And let's face it, that experience is probably uniformly terrible.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not like they've been getting such great, wonderful examples of people delivering feedback to them that you could be expected in any way to have cobbled together
Even
a
from
perfect
executives.
representation. Exactly.
Even from executives,
Yeah.
you would expect, oh, well, she's been promoted several times, so she must
Yeah.
really be good at this management stuff.
Yeah.
Nope.
No.
Executives actually are even worse.
Yeah.
Partly because the trust differential, they're not spending time building
Right.
trust in most cases. Many of them are quite trustworthy people, but the role gap becomes so big
Yeah.
that when an executive gives negative feedback, it's scary for a direct. People worry about their jobs. Like, is that the only interaction the vice president can have with me? He
Yeah.
noticed I did something wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And they don't do it well because they
Yeah.
didn't learn and they keep doing what
Right.
they've always done.
Exactly.
Oof, it's terrible.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And folks, we can assume that everyone's previous bosses were on average, at best, average. Many
Yeah,
of our
average.
managers were bad. Let's
Yeah.
face it, right? So what that means in most cases is there's not one-on-ones happening. There's not trust building happening. There's not a delivery format that is proven
Right.
successful for the delivery of feedback. And let's face it, it usually means the word feedback is just simply a negative thing. It means only bad stuff.
Yeah. In fact, if you look at the popular business press, if you look at Harvard Business Review, if you look at Fortune magazine, even if you look at some of the management articles about Wall Street Journal, whenever there's an article about feedback,
Yeah.
it says feedback, but that it only mentions negative
Yeah,
feedback.
exactly.
And I got a question from somebody the other day. It was a very good question. And she said to me, she was an HR exec, and she was in one of the sessions, and she says, well, Mark, you're talking about taking notes handwritten in these one-on-ones, but there are all these tools that my company provides, digital tools, to allow us to take notes at the same time on a shared screen, and we can send in agenda items in advance. These are all bad ideas for one-on-ones. And I told her, I said, look, I'm glad that there are digital tools companies trying to improve the one-on-one experience. Anything we can do to make more managers
Yeah.
give one-on-ones, the better. But there are certain non-negotiable basics about one-on-ones, and shared agendas and shared note-taking are definitely not one of them. How do we know that? Because we tested it. And so
Yeah.
I actually said to her, I said, look, I'm sorry. I just disagree. I would not use a tool from a digital tool company, even though it's probably beautiful, very elegant,
yes.
works on my phone, super, it works on any platform. And, we're an iOS company here, or an Apple company. So it works on my iPad, it works on my iPhone, it works on my Mac, and so on. But again, that tool was built by people who don't understand one-on-ones.
Right.
And I said, so I don't recommend any of those tools. And she was not happy about that. She wasn't mad. She just wasn't happy because we have all these tools. Why should we use those tools? Because they're not in concert with the purpose of one-on-ones,
Right.
which is to build trust. And how do we know that? Because we tested all kinds of things to try to figure out what
Right.
works best. And in that very same way, people who are talking about feedback in the popular press don't understand feedback.
Mm-hmm.
They think feedback is literally negative. And
Yep.
when you tell them, what about positive feedback? Oh, well, I don't know, praise. I said, can you imagine managers going around praising people, which by the way, praise is great. We have a podcast that says, yes, please praise. But imagine that the two tools I had to talk to somebody were praise and negative feedback.
Uh-huh.
Well, what happens is the negative feedback just becomes feedback.
Yeah.
And I just got some feedback.
As it did.
And that's negative, right?
Yeah.
So as we'll talk about, one of the ways to make negative feedback easier is to give more positive feedback, meaning there's only one model for giving feedback.
Mm-hmm.
It's just performance communications between a boss and her directs. So most bosses only give negative feedback.
Yeah.
And what that means for the recipient, what does that mean? It means there's low trust.
Mm-hmm.
There was a belief that feedback was negative feedback, which kind of hollows people out. Really? That's all feedback we get is negative? What about all the good things I do?
Mm-hmm.
And as we say, for the average manager, no offense, nobody taught you this stuff. Forgive yourself if you've done this before. Rest assured, folks, I have. Everybody else at Manager Tools, before we learned this stuff, they did it the same way, which is wrong. It was delivered unprofessionally. And it certainly was delivered. I mean, when I tell people, deliver negative feedback with encouragement, and they just look at me shocked, like, what? No, I want to correct
It's an
their- I want
oxymoron.
to tell
It
them
makes
they
no
made a
sense.
mistake.
Yeah.
I said, wouldn't you love a boss who had figured out a way to talk to her people in a way that said, I saw what you did. I heard what you did. I know what you did, and it wasn't great. Can you do that better next time? I believe in you. I trust you. I think you can figure this out on your own. That's encouraging. And you don't deliver it with a frown.
Right,
You don't deliver it
scowl.
with an edge in your voice, a scowl. That's good. Yeah. And if it's not focused on future effectiveness, directs when it comes to negative feedback will think that they're being told what they did wrong
Yep.
in the past, about which they can do nothing.
Yes, exactly. They're not time travelers. You're not a time traveler.
Yeah.
The only reason the organization expects you to talk about something we cannot do anything about is to have more future effective behavior, to make sure the
Yes.
future is better than the past. And making people feel bad for things they cannot change doesn't do anything helpful
No.
to shape
Well,
our future.
Many managers think so. Many managers think if I make them feel fearful about that,
Yeah.
they will avoid doing that. But that is a really dark way to
Mm.
think about motivating people. That's like the high school coach who tells the kid in football or swimming or track, let me show you what you did wrong.
Yeah.
Well, according to psychologists that I used to employ at Horseman & Company, when you tell people over and over what they do wrong, their mind doesn't know whether it's right or wrong, but they get more videos of themselves doing it wrong. And so they have multiple reps doing it wrong. And if they get into a pinch, they will do it the way the videos in their head tell them to do, which is the wrong way.
Yeah. And dude, the way I think about it is when it comes to feedback and giving that negative feedback poorly, I think to myself, okay, so let's say they feel punished, which is legitimate and absolutely
Sure.
perfectly reasonable given the way many of us give the feedback. And they're in that situation next time and they know, oh my gosh, I got in so much trouble last time. Oh my gosh, what do I do? Oh, what do I do?
Yeah.
Does anybody want their directs making decisions more slowly in the future? Because you've just created analysis paralysis.
In addition, many times they won't do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And every organization I know is talking about changing,
Yeah.
changing faster, falling forward,
Yeah.
making mistakes, but doing
Yeah.
it better. But then you treat them in a way when they make a mistake that says, I shouldn't do anything,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
I say you can make mistakes, but I totally don't want
And
that.
by the way, if you instill some fear in your directs, how much more creative does that make them?
yeah, seriously.
Creative people aren't motivated by fear. There's a whole line about creativity that you have to make things as fearless as possible.
Yeah.
You have to give people the sense that it's okay to make a mistake.
Yeah,
And so instilling fear is not going to make your people more creative. So they won't come up with better
Exactly.
ways. They'll come up with different, but maybe not better
yeah.
ways because
Or
they
they'll
weren't
make it
being
your
creative.
problem.
Yeah.
What do I do, boss? I don't know what to do. I can't. Yeah, great. Bring me more problems, please. Love that. No, we don't love that. We don't love it.
Exactly.
So let's face it. Exactly. So folks, remember that when it comes to managers who are giving feedback, they are also previous receivers of feedback. And you might argue that what they experienced was on the receiving end and therefore should be better than what they received in the past.
Right.
Argument can be made. Yeah.
No, you're dumb. If you got feedback before from somebody higher up in this organization and you didn't like it, you should know that you should do it differently.
Yeah.
But then you see that person get promoted again.
Right.
Well, apparently the organization respects that behavior.
Yeah.
They want more of that. So
Exactly.
why wouldn't I? What other training or guidance do they get about how to be a boss, right?
Exactly. It's not like the organization is helping them figure it out. It's not like it's providing an alternate tool to help them be better. So in terms of our ability to grow as managers, it's hindered by the rewards and punishments that are happening around us. What are people being rewarded for? If they're moving up the chain and they're delivering feedback badly, I have got no signal that that's the wrong way, other than the way I felt. And that's not maybe valid.
Look, the primary way organizations develop managers, and by the way, that's a gross overstatement because they don't generally, is they're supposed to learn from their bosses.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't anybody assume that the way to become a boss in this organization is to engage in behaviors that existing bosses do? Or, I don't think there's enormous amounts of difference between manager at company A and manager at company B. So if I move from A to B after having a bad manager at A, and I see manager B at company B doing the exact same things, apparently I'm, okay, now I have two examples in two different companies that says this is the way to do it. We don't give positive feedback. We don't build trust. And when I make a mistake, they're going to talk to me about my mistake. And they're going to make me try to feel bad about my mistake.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's a reasonable conclusion.
It is absolutely reasonable. Thanks for joining us, folks. That's all for this week. Join us again next week as we finish today's topic.
See you guys.